Are you sitting there right now using a PC with an overpriced operating system while you eat unhealthy ramen? Well, I apparently have all of the solutions to your life. Go to Vite Ramen right now and get their healthy protein-filled ramen for 10% off with offer code BrokenSilicon. And then go to cdkeyoffer.com to get 25% off all Windows keys and use Die Shrink to get 3% off everything else on the website. And we'll talk about these sponsors more later. But for now, let's just get on with the show. And welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and today I am joined by somebody who, was on a while ago, but, we've been talking for a few months. This is a person that is much more on the macro level, I would say, business and technology, and even geopolitics side, what goes on with semiconductors. And there's certainly been plenty of that going on in the news right now, so I couldn't think of a better person to have on at some point this spring. And I want to really thank you for coming on again, John. And you've been on before, but it was actually in 2022. So I'm sure there's some people that could use a proper introduction again. Who are you? What do you do? And what got you into doing what you do?
Hello, Tom. Good to be back. I remember reading the comments and they said that it was like the strangest pairing. So can't wait to blow their minds again. So my name is John and I run the Asianometry YouTube channel. And what I do basically is I make kind of video essays on mostly Asia stuff, but a lot of, technology history, industry history. And then, I moved to Taiwan, I would say around almost 8 years ago. And basically started out as a tourism channel, kind of showing videos of kind of what I was at this statue and that statue, and then eventually got into technology, and then got into history, and then after that into semiconductors during the TSMC is so prominent here, you can't help but hear about it. So yeah, been doing this for almost 7 years now. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, especially in my circles, talking about gaming hardware, semiconductors, when people hear Taiwan, they just instantly think TSMC. I think there was a reader mail submitted by a patron that I didn't include here, but I think someone did ask, like, what are the other, if any come to mind for you, big industries from Taiwan besides like semiconductors? Is there any other one that comes to mind for you?
Electronics is a big one because it grew out of that. I think there were some of the first industries to really break into PCs with Acer and whatnot. And on the side, I think Taiwan's quite dominant in bikes. One of the biggest giant bikes is out there, though they don't really produce the bikes. What else? If you like, pineapples. I'm right now, podcasting from a city where they grow a bunch of pineapples. Some people like the pineapple cakes. But to be real, it's, a lot of people care about the semiconductors.
Mm-hmm. That's what gets them in the news so often. I mean, we'll get to it eventually, but like a recent earthquake that happened there, it was, I'll be careful what I say, because it was almost like the first thing people asked wasn't like who was hurt. They were just like, is TSMC okay though? That's just the first thing they asked. They didn't even ask if people were wounded.
Yeah, it's a terrible thing. I was there when it happened, when the earthquake was, everyone, it wasn't as bad in Taipei as it was in other areas, like on the East Coast. Those people got pretty shook up, but it wasn't in terms of, it could have been a lot worse. That's what I'm going to say. And we can talk to it later if you want to talk about it, or you can talk about it now.
Yeah, you know what? Let's do it. Let's just talk about it now. Some of the questions I have for you are, how would you summarize what happened with the recent earthquake there, and were you impacted at all?
I was impacted in the sense that I was like in a fourth story building that started shaking. It was around 7:58 a.m. I remember, was sitting down, I was going to get some work done, and suddenly started shaking. And it shakes all the time, or not all the time, but it shakes relatively frequently.
It would be
And
abnormal for you to feel something like that at first.
yeah. And sometimes, like, the phone kind of goes on and tells you there's some early warning, but this time shakes a little bit. And then, so I learned this later. So an earthquake comes in basically three different waves. There's kind of like the primary waves, which is kind of more sideways. And then you have like the harder the surface waves. And those are much more intense. Those go up and down. So first couple 5 seconds, I was like, okay, it's kind of okay. And then it gets really big, and it felt like it lasted forever, but it was only like, 20, 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. And first thing I did, unfortunately, I want to say, is I grabbed my iMac and I just held it, trying to keep it from falling over. That was the only thing I was thinking at the time. And, in elementary, they tell you, this really dates myself, but go to a door frame or go do something. That's what I was told too. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't know what to do. So I was like, do I go for the door frame? But I'm not wearing my shoes, and, very strange times. But, in the end, it turned out okay. In terms of the fabs, I think the story with the fabs is that they know what to do when these things happen. They're built for a certain scenario. And there's, they've been listing a lot of the particular measures that they've taken for even individual equipment within the fabs to deal with that. And of course, there's going to be delays because you have nanometer alignment and you need to realign things, and it takes time, and it could take several days or even a week to get things up to full capacity. But I think, it didn't seem like if none of the buildings, and maybe one building in Hualien collapsed, and it wasn't even a collapse, it was like the dirt kind of liquefied under them. And if there was only one building really in Taiwan collapsed, I think the fabs were fine. And I think, it would have been, it was really terrible. I think so far we have a death count of 13 people, mostly in Hualien. So that's very sad, and I feel sorry. My hearts go out to them. But I think, for the fabs, I think they're totally fine.
Carbon Cry writes in, and he says, with every fab claiming a little damage, from UMC's 100% after a couple hours to TSMC's 80% online after a couple hours, with some tool damage, but nothing critical in microns, some losses in some fabs, but little effect expected, can we put to bed the earthquake will destroy the world's fabs argument for semiconductor autarky? Because it is, and it's something I bring up sometimes too, is, people often bring up, what would happen? China invaded Taiwan, blah, blah, blah. And I've always said, well, having everything in one space is just kind of a bit of an eggs in one basket, no matter what causes it. But it seems like this was handled incredibly well. Obviously not by coincidence after, I think it was 99, or there's a very, very bad 1999. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they learned from it, like humans often do, and put into place things to make it so it wouldn't be as bad next time. Do you think maybe after seeing how well this one was handled, it's a little, I don't want to use the word overhyped, but over worried about that earthquakes could disrupt the supply chain that badly? Or do you think it's not, and this was just a little bit of luck as well, and it really would have to be something besides earthquakes that would do it? Or I wonder what you think.
I think the thing about earthquakes is that they're a natural phenomena, right? And that they happen everywhere, right? It's not exactly like Oregon and the west coast of the United States sits on a very safe seismic area itself. I'm not about Oregon, but I know California definitely is not. I think that these things are, because it's a natural phenomena, it's something that they can plan for. And I think that, TSMC's been on Taiwan for 30 years, and I think they really understand that environment in terms of geography and climate and whatnot. And I think they've seen pretty much all of it. I think that's probably why they become so optimized at kind of building fabs there. I do agree with you in the sense that it doesn't make sense that all of the fabs should be in Taiwan. I think there was a point where, it is very strange to think that it could be such a thing. I think people too often try to make Dune comparisons between the spice must flow and all the spice comes from one planet.
Yeah, I've seen that, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's it's uncomfortable. And I think that's it's healthy in the sense that we build fabs outside of Taiwan, if only because we need to kind of make that de-escalate that sort of conversation because I think it's unhealthy. It's really focusing on one aspect of the production process and not necessarily the parts that, kind of like when the sushi comes out, we all think it's the sushi master that's singly responsible for the sushi, but you have to look at the fisherman, the rice grower, the rice farmer, the cooks in the kitchen, and all that. TSMC draws from a huge supply chain that spans the whole world, and I think that's something people need to remember, and people should keep that in mind.
Well, I actually want to bring up this question then. So TechnoLads writes in, he says, if there actually was a new world war with Taiwan being one of the epicenters of it, do you think this could give Intel an advantage since their fabs are mainly American-based? And I bring this up because obviously a war in Taiwan or around Taiwan would affect Taiwan more than people who use other foundries. But I always feel like it's a bit that these arguments, like if someone's betting on Intel because they're more geopolitically safe, it's a bit similar to people who like buy gold bars for the apocalypse. Like, yeah, I mean, okay, gold would maybe be better than, I don't know, some sort of digital bank account, maybe, but it's only really going to help you if it's like not a full apocalypse. This is a full apocalypse. No one's using gold anyways. And even if it was like a baby version of the end times, I mean, it'd still have to be a pretty specific scenario where like, okay, you can't use your money, but also people accept gold. It's actually hard for me to come up with a scenario where that would ever happen whatsoever. I mean, to sell gold, you have to verify it's gold. There needs to be experts who can test a gold bar. I mean, and I kind of think of the same way a little bit when it comes to like TSMC versus like Intel foundries in some sort of world war or scenario, because it's like, you guys understand that like there's places where they get these minerals. There's like half of the manufacturing for everything else that touches a system is in countries all over Asia that would also stop you from building an Intel system, by the way, everybody. Like, I'm wondering how you feel about that. Like, how much of an advantage Intel would actually have if there was something like that.
Probably not that much. I think, there's a lot to, for example, I think, and this is just, wild speculation, of course. The percentage or whatever of such a thing happening in Taiwan, I think, is still exceedingly low. I think the thing about Intel is that you are, the supply chain, like I pointed out, draws not just from, from United States only. A lot of it also comes from Japan and Asia, like you point out, and the packaging is done in Southeast Asia and all that. And if you think about it, right, the loss of capacity to that scale, on TSMC scale, would be kind of like a very incredible number, right? We had a chip shortage, but the number of when supply went out of demand by something like 10, 20, 15%, and suddenly like everyone was going crazy. I think when a single company is responsible for a significant portion of the world global supply, it's even more. I think it'll be even crazier. So I definitely agree with you there. I think like it's just one of those things. And like if you're buying that as like a hedge, then are you making that much money anyways? Because Intel stock does seem to be in a bit of a downturn for a while. So like you're waiting for something that necessarily is a very low chance of happening.
Well, and here's a funny thing too. Intel Arrow Lake uses TSMC. Lunar Lake will use TSMC. Whatever Battle Mage tiles they make, which is up for debate how much of that's even going to come out, but that's still TSMC. I think Gaudi 3, their AI thing they just announced, is TSMC 5 nanometer. So like, there's a part of me that's like, don't you guys, where have you been the past year? Like, if TSMC disappeared, all of Intel's next products were designed on it. They could switch it to their own fabs, but they would have to spend all this money doing that anyways. They rely on TSMC now too.
Yeah, and then not to mention all the other products that Intel makes that are not like CPUs. I mean, a lot of those are fabbed at.
The chipsets and
the chipset, and like Intel and TSMC have a good relationship. I mean, they're one of the first customers, so I think it's high reliance.
TSMC Peyton writes and he says, would you wager one Virginia class submarine the PLA makes a move on Taiwan by the end of the current decade? So you said low probability. Do you think it's actually there's a decent chance this will even happen then?
I don't have a submarine to wager, so it's not really like the question doesn't
I think
make
the
sense.
bet is you would only make the bet if you're 100% sure because you don't even have one. That's kind of the idea.
Yeah.
Because then he has to figure out how to get one.
Yeah. Then he needs to figure out how to get a submarine. I live here, right? So I'm basically betting my life that it's not happening.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Like, if you were sure it was going to happen, probably be other things you would be doing. Why? Could you say more on that? Like, why do you think it's just not going to happen?
I think it's like, it's a complicated history. I think there's right now there's a dispute right now going on in Jinmen, the outer islands of Jinmen. And something I've noticed is that, and of course, I'm not some sort of professional geopolitical analyst, so don't talk to me. But I generally find that things that happen, things that we always flag as going to be massive problems, tend not to be such problems because there's been so much focus on it actually being the issue. I think generally what happens is that it comes out of something that really causes a World War III, if there ever is such a thing, would come out of right or left field, right? It'd be kind of a really random place. And I think that there's been 70, 80 years of Taiwan and the mainland kind of hating on each other, but also talking to each other. And I think, like I said, right now in Jinmen, there's a big incident with some fishermen and the Coast Guard in Taiwan, and the two sides are talking. And I think as long as the two sides are talking, there's going to be de-escalation is possible. Now, I do think, of course, there are certain historical situations, hard to make bets on such things. But, they are, I think for the most part, it's the priorities of the party down in the mainland are not necessarily focused 100% on the capture of Taiwan. And I think everyone would prefer not there being a war.
Well, and you have to imagine with a lot of the recent wars that have happened that China is looking at, you would hope, although there's no way to really know in a dictatorship what they're thinking, but you would hope that they would look at that and go, well, that didn't work out well. Also, we're learning that we actually rely on the West for half of our stuff, so this doesn't really make any sense. And that additionally, anytime one side pushes one way, the other side probably spent a year thinking about, with a think tank, how they would respond should this thing happen. And most of it's probably predicated on de-escalation, right? So to go with your point of it has to be out of left field, because otherwise they probably war gamed out everything they would do in every other scenario already. Most of them are probably pointing towards trying to not make it worse.
Yeah. And I think if you ever seen the reactions of how mainland people treat Taiwanese, it's very they care in a sense. They care in their own sort of perspective. They really love the Taiwanese people. I think I think that's the best way to say it. And this is from my own personal opinion. This is based on my own, what I've seen of the interactions. They try really, really hard to win over Taiwanese hearts and minds. And I do think that comes from a cultural place somewhere deep inside. Not to make any, like I said, not a geoanalyst, not a professional guy out in DC in a think tank. This is just my own personal observation.
Well, it's true though. I think it's easy for people to think of places, even if they're dictatorships, and they would say that's why I can do that. But think of them as a monolith. Whereas, I don't know. I mean, I think sometimes we're surprised by which countries push back against their leaders and which ones protest and which ones don't. I mean, there was the zero COVID policy, and it was ended overnight when there were protests all across China. So who's to say if something unpopular were to happen in this department? They're all people, though. They might not go along with the plan, too, if someone actually wanted to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think mainland people are pretty hardcore on Taiwanese bringing Taiwan back. That being said, I do
Well,
think
the leadership, you think the average person cares, though, or not?
Depends.
There's no way for us to really know, I guess.
Yeah. There's 1.4 billion people. Who really knows? I think generally our perspective, my perspective personally, is that the leadership sees that what their goals can be accomplished can come in a variety of ways. It doesn't necessarily mean flag in the on the Red House.
So I guess just kind of putting a pin in this sort of conversation, like, how ready do you think TSMC is for the next 10 years in terms of weather events, geopolitics? I mean, it's been a pretty turbulent few years in the 2020s so far. Like, it seems like you think Taiwan's ready for earthquakes. It seems like you think a worst case World War III scenario probably wouldn't be the way people envision a worst case scenario happening. Like, what do you think people might be missing that could be disruptive in Taiwan? Like, what do you think the most likely things are? Or do you just think, I don't know, you live there, you chose to live there, you're like, I don't know, they'll probably handle whatever?
Power situation seems pretty rough. I think a lot of the situation in Taiwan with regards to renewable power, definitely they're not hitting their targets, especially in solar. A lot of solar and wind. Wind, I think, wind is behind, of course, because a lot of it has to be offshore, and solar is a big problem because a lot of the people don't like that the land is being used for something like that. So I think that there is a substantial problem, and of course they want to shut down the nuclear plants, right? So I think like substantial concern, I think on TSMC's part is a lot regarding the power situation, and it's a big problem, and it could be a cork on the company's continued growth on Taiwan, and maybe that's the point why. I mean, big reason why they're moving out to Japan and United States too. Like, the power situation is pretty rough. A lot of
don't some of these cutting edge nodes use absurd amounts of energy? To make their wafers.
Yeah, like TSMC itself is responsible for like high single digits of Taiwan's entire power generation. So if you think about it, 23 million people, single business is responsible for all that. That's kind of crazy. So there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of concern going forward is like, where is all this power going to come from, especially when we get to like, the 14A node or A14 node or so on. So it's going to be that's something I think they need to negotiate. But in terms of like the geopolitics of that, I think when you see like their newest board of directors, a lot of it is people they pull from America and Europe who have experience with government, right? And I think a lot of that is, those are going to be the people to help smooth things out and even advise them on situations that definitely caught them off guard, because TSMC for 28, 30 years was a company that just made stuff, and now suddenly they're the leaders, and they're definitely adjusting to that, and they need to adjust to it.
That's such an interesting point you bring up, because I think it's such an easy conclusion to come to from an American-centric perspective when you see TSMC building a 2-nanometer node in Arizona and going, oh, this is for diversity in case China invades Taiwan, because we got to worry, and that's why. How much do you think this expansion of fabs to other places, it is, again, a part of it has to be not putting all of your eggs in one basket, but also might be they're just realizing, like, one of the best places for solar, Arizona, and it's not in Taiwan. So maybe we need to start building fabs in other countries just because we're running out of space. Like, how much of it do you think is that?
I think a lot of it is returns to space, is regards to space issues. Taoyuan, they were going to put a new fab in Taoyuan, which is a city, that's where the airport is. But they had a massive bad PR hit when a lot of the people, the villagers there kind of rebelled against the land appropriation. And like, it's a big problem. I mean, they're still looking to where to put the fab, and they can't put as many fabs as where they want to, and like the infrastructure probably can't handle it either. So in some ways, I think TSMC comes out pretty good from this expansion. They get a bunch of money to pay for it. They get to tap infrastructure in other areas, and like it's not like they stopped building. I was just in Kaohsiung the other day, looked at the Fab 22. That's their N2 fab in Kaohsiung. It's going to be massive. There's already 2 shells up, so I think it's gonna be big.
All right, so I am going to switch gears here, going back to the front of our script, though I thought we'd cover this first. Benjamin Cannon writes in, he said, if someone told you where AMD was in 2024 before Zen's launch, so I guess that would have been end of 2016. So basically, 8 years ago, if someone told you where AMD was going to be now, what would have been your reaction? Would you have been surprised or not?
Oh, I would have been really surprised. I mean, that time, like, the company was really struggling. And I think, like, at the time, we all thought Intel was still quite strong at the time. And I think it's very fascinating to see how the fortunes of the 2 companies have sort of diverged over time. At the same time, you have to think of it as kind of like they had this really core asset because they have this x86 license at the time or this ability to make x86 CPUs. I think that should have been more indicator to people that there was something coming along. And then when they were switching, or in the process of switching fabs to new foundries, that should have been the best indicator to everyone.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting. I listened to a little bit of the last time you were on, and it was kind of a similar question, like, how do you feel about AMD right now? How do you feel about their future? And you said that, let me see here. You said that so far all AMD has had to do to grow is really beat Intel. And soon that's not going to be enough. They want to keep growing year over year. So we're about to find out if they can truly innovate as a company, not just beat Intel 5 times in a row. How do you feel about AMD now? Do you think they're proving that they can do more than just crush Intel?
It's pretty tough. I think, like, one of the things that we're all seeing right now is that a lot of these companies are ditching x86 for ARM chips and for maybe even RISC-V chips. And I think it's like, if they were, the pool is still quite big, but the pool is now there's a leak in the pool, if you know what I mean. And I think AMD hasn't necessarily made moves to kind of build, I guess, the rocket ship to Mars kind of thing if your planet is having a problem. So I think so far, I think they're still doing okay. They're so much smaller. They can still keep growing. I also feel like there's a lot of... there's some technical limitations that seem to be some issues for them where, like, they haven't really negotiated the software stack so well. They haven't necessarily looked at far ahead as well as Nvidia on certain things. They're sort of like a halfway baked kind of mode. So I think it's... I think so far from it was 2 years ago, right? Wow. Last time I was here.
Like, year and a half, technically, I think. But,
a year and a half. Does feel like they're sort of still saying not much has changed in the sense that from back then and now. I do think it probably won't, because in the sense that it will be very difficult. That would require a culture change that usually tends to come with a change in leadership. And I think right now people think Lisa Su can't do anything wrong.
So QH Freddy writes in, and he says, AMD is often seen as the plucky underdog relative to Intel, and after ATI, also relative to Nvidia. To what extent do you think they themselves are stuck in a mindset of being an underdog company? And I bring this one up specifically now, too, because I've probably talked about it in like a musing sort of way, a passing sort of way on Broken Silicon recently, but like I've had some conversations with people that work at AMD over the past like 6 months, and something that's never really become a video, but maybe could someday, is like a lot of the delays we've seen. Like one of them's on the books. Like I don't remember which earnings call it was. AMD said Zen 4 was going to come out at a certain point, and then it actually came out about a year after, or half a year to a year after they said it would. Zen 5 has been, not officially, but it has been delayed from where they wanted it to be out. RDNA 3 barely launched in the year it was supposed to. And from what I've heard, MI300 is basically, it's out, but like basically now it's out. Like they announced it launching, I would argue, like 3 times. Like a lot of this delays and like kind of odd decision making and problem issues is from this mentality I've been told recently by people at AMD, and people who work with people at AMD, that they still had an underdog mentality last year that cost them in terms of momentum and keeping talent. Like I was basically told that, like, if you work at Nvidia and and you want to take the weekend off. Look, they expect you to work really hard when you're there, but they're like, okay, take it off. You have time off. Same with Apple. And AMD would say, no way, we've got to work on Saturday because we've got to beat Intel. We're the underdog. And, at a certain point, some of these people just went to Nvidia or Apple or another company that would pay them twice as much, give them more time off. And AMD's realizing, they're making a lot more money. We can afford to pay our people more. We're going to lose talent. And I actually heard they lost a decent amount of talent last year to competing companies. I've heard they've mostly fixed the issue, but and it's probably fixed now, but that we're still probably going to see some knock-on effects of it for another 6 months or so, of just like the turbulence of failing to realize they need to do more to keep talent. So, yeah, I mean, QH Freddy's question was how much of an underdog mentality do you think is affecting some of this? But I wonder if you think there's more to it than that, or Lisa Su. And I don't know if you've heard anything about like what I've said. Have you any thoughts on that?
I've been thinking about this for a while. I mean, I did a few videos on AMD's history, and they've always had this really underdog history. Even basically from when they were founded. I mean, they really beat the odds. And I think that's really kind of helped them stay alive at certain points. But like also, there's also like we really give value to that as like a culture. But at the same time, you could see how it does hold them back in the sense that it doesn't allow them to. It really restricts their mindset because they got to live. They don't think in some ways big enough, right? So if like, for instance, right, when Huawei stepped down from TSMC, right, and a slot opened up for the leading edge node, right, why didn't AMD step up to take that? Like, why didn't they jump up for that opportunity, right? Like, I get the sense that sometimes that they really see themselves as like this small company that's kind of fighting in a certain space, but at the same time, it restricts their vision, right? They see themselves in the sense that, for instance, with regards to these AI boomers, right? They see themselves as a chip company, right? Why aren't they doing what Nvidia is doing, where they're building a data center, they're building data products, like they're building all the linkage between the big servers and all that. So I think in the sense that AMD sees themselves as like the trailing semiconductor company behind Intel really puts them in sort of a box, and that keeps them, pushes them down because like they're always going to be a semiconductor company, and that sort of attitude, I think, maybe perhaps is not that healthy as time goes by over time, and it probably could be the reason why that their kind of challenger or their competitors to CUDA and all that haven't really worked out so far.
So I think that's mentality's changing, but like, what would you look for as an example of that changing? Like, I don't know if it's necessary for Lisa Su just to say, hey, I've done everything and more that I ever thought I could ever accomplish here. It's time for someone else to have a new vision. But I think right now they kind of see her the way, but probably not exactly the same as how like people I've talked to at NVIDIA see Jensen Huang, where they're like, no, we don't, there's no one who's going to replace him anytime soon. That'd be insane, But like, what would you be looking for her to announce, for AMD to do, for them to do, to make you think, oh, they really are seeing things differently?
I mean, this is just off the top of my head. I mean, it really does. Maybe it doesn't necessarily mean that she steps down, but perhaps she goes up to chairman level, or perhaps she takes some time off, or maybe she starts promoting successors. Right? I think like generally my feeling is that with big culture changes at companies, they don't, like I said just now, they don't happen without changes in leadership. Doesn't necessarily mean that that the old leader just vanishes or something like that. I mean, there's times when sometimes it happens very peacefully. I mean, look at Microsoft. I mean, the old CEO steps aside, and suddenly the new CEO is a real fresh breath of air. So I think it doesn't necessarily happen. Like, perhaps we could make the argument, and I don't know if people are going to come after me for this, but like, let's say like Lisa Su is necessarily, she was the CEO for a certain type, right? Maybe she was the right CEO to pull to kind of dig out of that massive hole that AMD had found itself in at the end of 2009, 2012, and all that. But like, is she the correct CEO to be challenging a company like Nvidia for the future of AI and all that? That perhaps is more up in the air.
Yeah, I think one thing I'm not would want to. One thing that I am looking for AMD to start doing more and more is stop making decisions based on what their competition does. And you can see how they're kind of there in CPU against Intel. Like something I heard from for years now, actually, for contacts at AMD is they tend to, with some products, compare it to Apple or some other chip in server instead of Intel because they already see Intel as possibly not really their main competitor in the future because of how successful they've been against Intel recently. They don't seem to be like, oh, we're going to launch this APU to compete with Meteor Lake. They launched something that was better than Meteor Lake first, and now they're making something soon called Strix Halo, and like they didn't need Intel to make some giant APU for them to make one. They're going to do it before Intel does. Like, and you see them, but in graphics, it seems like my favorite example of them, not to be too crass, but I called it playing 4D chess up their own ass, was like Nvidia comes out and they're like, it's called the 4080 12 gigabyte, even though it's not a 4080. We're going to charge $900. And then AMD comes out and goes, it's the 7900 XT, not the 7900. We're going to call this one the XT. And now we've created the XTX for $1,000, which is like a 25% better product that costs 20% more. I mean, 10% more makes no sense to get the 7900 XT. And I think it's because they were just like, well, yeah, but look at the 4080 12 gigabyte. It's better than that. And then NVIDIA cancels the 4080 12 gigabyte. And now AMD's just got this product that everyone thinks looks silly. If they would have just thought, in a vacuum without worrying about what NVIDIA was doing, they probably would have come to a different conclusion on how to segment that. I feel like they do that in CPU. I don't feel like they do that in GPU. I don't feel like they do that in AI or really anything else yet. And I don't know why they just make a good product that you've triangulated would be good for this product category because of these reasons. Don't go, well, they're making that, so how do we compare ourselves to that and then try to play 4D chess around them? Like, just make a good product that your own data tells you the market needs.
Right. No, I agree. That makes a lot of sense to me. I think that's like I think that's a good example of basically AMD kind of responding to leaders, and there's been a lot of history with that company doing that. They need to kind of change that mindset, and it's going to be a huge challenge for them. I do find that to be very big. Probably the bigger concern going over the next 10, 15 years rather than 3 or 4.
Essie is ready for spring. She's excited to get outside and start carrying around entire tree branches that she just thinks are S-tier sticks, which really, they can't be that healthy for her, although I can't imagine they're really any more unhealthy than the typical ramen people are eating on a busy workday. Well, of course that is, unless they eat Vite Ramen. This piece of content is brought to you by Vite Ramen. Vite Ramen is a healthy, tasty, and shelf-stable food crafted by an American startup that offers tons of options for eating healthy, like their classic packages that make it easy to add protein and other ingredients of your choice, or also their Ramen Go packages that offer a healthy, microwavable option for those who truly only have a 15-minute lunch break when they are away from home. And I also need to take a second to promote their Nano Boost Vitality Powder as well. Seriously, this is a fantastic alternative to coffee that you'll find me drinking in many Broken Silicon episodes when I'm forced to record late at night, and I truly do believe it blows away their competition. You have to understand, I've been working with the people at Vite for years now, and I have a lot of freedom in what I can promote from their website. And out of the things they make, I have to say, it blows away the competition. This thing tastes great. It's easy to mix into water. You never has that sand-like texture their competitors often have. And so I really cannot recommend that enough, in addition to just basically everything on their website. Going to their website and buying something from Vite Ramen, that directly supports this channel, and it supports a sponsor that's been good to the Moore's Law is Dead team for many years. So I really do like their products, all of them, especially their ramen and Nano Boost Vitality Powder, and I can't recommend them enough. So support Moore's Law is Dead by supporting Vite today. Well, when it comes to beating Intel, though, Dig Wiggler writes in and he says, why does AMD not stomp Intel with Zen? At the moment, according to rumors, it seems like AMD will still limit the initial Zen 5 launch to up to 16 full cores, like they've been doing since Zen 2, in lieu of launching a 24-core that is partial Zen 5, partial Zen 5C with V-Cache that's been leaked as at least possible by Tom's channel. If that happens, they limit themselves to 16 cores still. Why? Why not have a special flagship chip like Intel? Why does AMD not take that killing blow and just crush them once and for all? AMD is frustrating sometimes, like they want to be in second place almost.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to think about it. I mean, like perhaps there could be like they write to a spec, and they write to a spec that they know that there's a niche for, and that means that you look at the other guys' products and whatnot. And I think like it goes to what we just talked about. I think like they really do have that sort of underdog mentality, but that also means like they're very budget conscious. And I think back in the kind of the 1990s and the 2000s, I mean, AMD really was struggling to kind of keep up with Intel and whatnot, and they really had to, I guess, tighten. It must have really inculcated a culture of kind of keeping the belt tight, and I think that might be a huge limitation on them. Could also be technical issues, like who knows really, but like I would bet that it's a combination of all of it.
Yeah, and I guess I'll be fair. We don't know. They might. What if they announce this giant thing that they could have been doing for a while that they do? I would say that now to everybody. I have no indications they're going to go all out, but they literally could. This thing isn't launching for like another, I think, 3 to 6 months. So I don't. For all we know, it's just whether they put this Lego piece on that one and give it a name. Like for all we know, they could do it. But I would suggest that if they don't, it's because they just know that like the server space will pay them more. They don't think they ever need to beat Intel by more than 10%, and they just want to make as much money as possible, always technically winning. But it is my opinion that if they could like get like a double digits win, like, and just keep it for another year, like that'd kind of be all they need to do to finally cement their win. And I personally think, even if they made 10 of them and you can't even buy it, they should just do it to have a chart, on a Tom's Hardware Linus Tech Tips video, so that you always see them there. I don't know. Technolads writes in, what are you most excited for with future Zen iterations? More cores, AI engines, more advanced cache, 10 gigahertz? Of all of those, which would make you go, whoa, I need to get this new gen of Zen? Because I know you tend to not talk about the nitty gritty of the hardware too much, although I'm sure you're familiar with some launches from AMD specifically, because you use a computer, so I'm sure you're interested in what they're making. But like, just in general at this point, what would impress you? Like, we've had 16 cores for a while. They seem to give you at least 20% more performance every generation. An AI engine, some new special ability. Like, what would really make you go, oh, wow, this is incredible, just like when AMD really took the market, a few years ago?
I think like I'm always being excited by a new node. I think like if there's a new node, like we all know that this 2-nanometer node is going to be big. So like I personally always try to get a new node, even if a chip that's made on a new node, because it just feels better. Even though nowadays nodes are incremental and all that, but this new node with N2 is a gate all around node, and it's a truly new architecture. It's going to be.
So you're
miracle.
saying like fundamentally new, not just like when they went from like 16 to 14 to 12 or 7 to 6 and 5 to 4. You're like, you want something that's kind of feels like when we went to, I don't know, 16 nanometer from 28.
Yeah, I think like it's a fundamentally new transistor, and it will not perform as well in certain aspects, but it will perform well in, at least we all know, at least in power. So it's going to be really exciting. So I personally am stoked for. I don't know when AMD is going to come out with it. Probably considering their cadence, but they should. They're probably, it'll be a while. But like, if they've learned anything from Intel or Nvidia, they should go faster. That's my taking away from it. Like they're not releasing fast enough. But anyways, my feeling is that like with this new N2 node is going to be a game changer, and it's going to be really exciting to look forward to. We'll see what happens.
Well, I have a roadmap that suggests that at least a version of Zen 6 will use 2 nanometer. It's a little vague, and of course things can change. I mean, I was told that Zen 5 was supposedly supposed to use 3 nanometer for all variants. Then they said, well, that's not going to work out. 3 nanometers having issues, so let's only use it for like the dense cloud version. And of course, Zen 6 is supposed to come out late next year. Zen 5 was supposed to come out early this year, though, so who knows? Maybe it'll end up coming out 2026. But I think they are intending to use 2 nanometer by 2026 for sure, actually.
That'll be exciting. That'll be exciting. I might even visit the fab to see, or might even go to the outside of the fab to see it to see it. Yeah.
Benjamin Cannon writes in. He says, "What do you think will be the future of AMD CPU advanced packaging regarding the chiplet to chiplet interconnects?"
That's a really good question. I think, like, asking a question like that, I think is also a good is asking about what is the future of advanced packaging technology as a whole. I think eventually my biggest feeling is that eventually we're going to stack these even higher. And I don't know what way, I don't know how, but and I don't know if it's going to be, the heat must be insane. But when you see things when that Synopsis Ansys acquisition, where you see a company spending $30 billion to acquire a company just because it's about heat thermal for packaging, tells me that something big is cooking over there. So I think in the future, advanced packaging, not necessarily for AMD, but for the industry as a whole, is going to go vertical. It's going to be exciting, and I think it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think Zen 6 is supposed to, if you look at Zen 2, 3, 4, soon 5, they all basically look the same. IO die, 2 chiplets. I mean, they all look clearly I think they even have almost the same die size, literally the set, just to save money on some of the tooling they use for some of them, so they've been sticking to the same idea since 2019. My understanding is Zen 6 finally changes that too, that they're there's going to be a base die, a couple dies at least on top of that, maybe another die on top of that. So I think that'll be really exciting to see. But you also see all of these companies investing in newer forms of cooling. I do feel like that might be one of those things that also surprises us, is that I'm wondering if we'll get to, because I remember, I think it was at Hot Chips 2019 in person that time, and there's a presentation from TSMC where they were talking about how if you actually, we're going to see some new 3D stack chips, they're going to have performance benefits by being stacked, but there's going to be years after that when we finally have ground up designs meant for 3D stacking. They're not just if we 3D stacked it, we can get this 10% boost. They're going to say this architecture only works 3D stacked, where you could see 100% IPC increases because now you're communicating vertically and horizontally. And I think there will be some of that soon. And then there will be all these heat issues. And then I wouldn't be surprised if the next 5 years after that, maybe on 2 nanometer and 1 nanometer, and we're just kind of stuck on those nodes, half the performance may come from novel ways to cool these chips. And there'll be newer and newer types of 3D printed copper heat pipe cooling things and stuff that they do, where we realize that from generation to, it would be fascinating if I don't know if this would be Zen 7, but Zen 8 to Zen 9, the difference was just the cooling was twice as good, and so it clocked twice as fast. It was actually mechanically, physically, that's how they improved it. I think that's probably going to happen with some products.
Yeah. But the big thing with these gate-all-around transistors is that because there's more control over the channel as the current flows through, the heat issues won't be as bad. So there will be less energy dissipated as heat. So that's it. So I would love to see how that translates to real world performance. And I think if you look at, and on a separate note, if you look at how that MIH 300 or whatever they call it, that AI chip, that's a stacked chip too in some sense. And I think hopefully that filters out through to the rest of the AMD lineup. I mean, I would definitely expect it to be, because once you learn certain things from the most high-end chip, that can filter down to the rest of the lineup. I think it'll be very exciting to see how that benefits PC makers and whatnot.
Carbon Cry writes in. He says, "Do you think it is a smart bet by AMD to use OSAT advanced packaging, organic RDL embedded bridge, wherever possible, instead of doing it at TSMC as everyone else is, especially given the COWOS shortage we seem to still be in?"
I think they have had no choice. I think TSMC doesn't necessarily. This CoWoS thing really caught TSMC off guard. I think caught everyone off guard, right? No one really expected people to really want this sort of this random packaging, this very special packaging solution that I don't think a lot of people really even know what is about. The margins on that are lower for TSMC. So they generally tend to say they're not so excited about. They notice that they've actually licensed it out to a third party OSAT company, to the OSAT companies. Like, can you imagine TSMC ever licensing out its technology for its wafers to another third party? So I think it's an indication of what they really see the value in that particular CoWoS production. It's generally it's not exactly their money, their bread and butter.
Yeah. All right. I want to shift gears again here to, how do you feel about Intel's current situation? I mean, I have to be honest that what I've been hearing from almost all of my sources at this point, especially over the past 3 months, I'd say, within Intel or not, just does not instill confidence in me regarding their future right now. And in fact, seeing the DoD, Department of Defense, poll funding from Intel, while TSMC gets granted billions to build 2-nanometer fabs in Arizona from the U.S. government, makes me further question how propped up Intel really can. Like, the government's going to support Intel where it makes sense to support them for a million obvious beneficial reasons to the United States. But you see them just throwing $7 billion bucks at TSMC for a fab in Arizona. And I have to wonder, like, how much this bet people are making, like Intel can't fail. They'll always be too big to fail. It's probably true to an extent, but I actually don't think it's as true as some people think it is. And I do actually continue to believe, like, people are underestimating how much trouble Intel's in right now. Or I don't know, maybe you disagree and you think they're doing well.
I mean, there's no disagreement that they're in a lot of trouble, that there's a lot of work that they have to do ahead of them. I think there's probably some cash issues. I think it's maybe not the best stock to buy. But I think in terms of the company performance, I think, like, I mean, they know they have a goal. They know they can march towards it. I think I think they'll stabilize the ship someday. I'm mildly positive on it. I think they'll do well eventually. Like, it's a long, big eventually. I think as long as the company doesn't collapse and all that. With regards to, like, I do think that there is something weird about them not receiving the funding for the Secure Enclave facility. That's the one you're talking about, where the Defense Department pulled funding from Intel. Maybe they just wanted to pin it on commerce to do it. I think, like, in terms of, like, the Secure Enclave, maybe perhaps that's more a reflection of what DoD thinks that they need necessarily, rather than what they actually, than an actual saying on what Intel's quality is. I mean, perhaps, but who knows? I mean, could just
some
be
people told me
politics.
they think they may have, like, seen Intel and gone, we don't think this is a good use of our money. Like, someone told, again, is this everyone? Have I talked to every person that is connected to this decision? No. But there's a couple people I spoke with where they're like, they didn't like what they saw. I wonder if you think that, and do with that what you will, me telling you that. But I don't know. I think that there's a real hesitancy here because they're like, well, are we buying this with Intel for the right reasons, or are we just giving them something they need, but we could probably be giving it to other people that will give us a better return on investment? Obviously, we want more fabs in the US, so Intel, build the fab and we'll help you pay for it. But you do have to build the fab, right? And I think there may be some, I don't know. I've even heard from somebody in the Department of Defense that, like, they're even looking at more and more EPYC servers as well. So I don't know. There's a part of me that really questions if there's much more behind this than that people are like, well, don't read into it too much. I keep getting the feeling, I don't know, maybe we should be reading into this. I'm not saying I'm right. You know.
Oh, no. It's just interesting. It's an interesting thought. I mean, like, I did study the Secure Enclave program for a while, and I think there was a lot of reasons why they kind of pivoted away from it in the sense like that. They moved from a Secure Enclave where we'll always have one fab that's kind of deemed clean, right? And that program worked for a while, but then I think what happened was that there must have been some dissatisfaction with it in the sense that it was making product that it kind of limited them on the product that they were able to do. So I think what they were moving towards from when I stopped making that video was that they were moving towards kind of like a, they would certify parts of the supply chain that they understood and they could really use. I think that the sense that perhaps Defense Department didn't want to be locked in again to making product to a particular fab's product, no matter whose. Could have been politics too, because national security, the reason for the CHIPS Act was national security, and defense is like, well, we don't really use 2 nanometer fabs or 2 nanometer chips anyways, and all that. So it's definitely literally the definition of politics. So who knows? But but with regards to Intel's operating performance and how they're building these fabs, I think they have good innovations. They've always been good at making innovations. They've been so bold at doing these innovations to really jump ahead of companies. I think the interesting thing is that now we're starting to see, necessarily in the past, Intel wasn't necessarily known as the best manufacturer. Like if you go read the oral histories of companies, of people from the 1990s, they would always say Intel wasn't a juggernaut manufacturing wise, but they had that monopoly. They had that CPU monopoly, and they can use that to basically play, poker bully, right? And things are changing now, right? That CPU monopoly is no longer as financially beneficial. So we're starting to see a lot in terms of I don't necessarily think anything has changed with Intel. They're still going to be good at R&D. They're still going to be good at manufacturing to some extent. But now that they're not the best at it, what does that really mean for the company going forward? And I think that's it's very thoughtful. It requires a lot of, I think, nuance, but I think it makes me think a lot about kind of where that company is going in the future. I think personally, they should have split the company in half long time ago. But it's the board didn't want it, and people didn't want to. I guess people couldn't really stomach the thought of it. But
I think that's half of it. I mean, there's that quote "real men have fabs" is something they
Jerry
said
Sanders.
30 years ago or something.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question because I remember who said, maybe I was talking to Daniel Nenny or I don't know. So someone brought this up to me that almost there's this idea of Intel really should have gone fabless maybe 20, 30 years ago. But even if you were right that they should have then, that time has passed and maybe they shouldn't now. I wonder how you feel about, do you think that there was this window where it would have made a ton of sense to do it and that would have been the right move and they would be better off if they had? But now they shouldn't. I wonder how or do you think they still should?
I don't think economically I think economically it is the right decision to split the company. But we can't just look at things economically in this world of ours, right? We have to look at politics. We have to look at developmental industry, the importance of having manufacturing within the United States. I think that's all important. I think if Intel had split, then it would have been just another fabless company, and I think that would have been devastating to certain parts of their product lineup. I also think government wouldn't have allowed it, or they would have never stomached it. I think we would have gotten a lot of bad PR from it. It's today it's even more so. I think the situation is still the same. I think the company is better off split apart. If you don't think TSMC salespeople are out there slamming on the "we don't compete with you" line, I think that's going to be such a huge problem for them on their foundry side. So I think and then without the money coming from the product side feeding their manufacturing business, then how are they going to fund it, right? They're doing this strategy where they're going to run old fabs over time, all that. But TSMC is already kind of saying that's not working anymore, right? Because they're upgrading their old fabs now too. So if your competitor if you're moving into the space where your competitor is moving out of somewhat, that gives me concern to some extent. But in the end, I mean, the company's still profitable somewhat, and I think the company's still going to make money. I mean, it won't die, it won't collapse, but I think it's going to, it's 60, 70 years old. I think there's always a life cycle for these companies. You can't expect them to be around and dominant forever.
So, yeah, I think that's always an important thing to clarify too, whenever you talk about any juggernaut, like what they become, what doomed means. Like, I don't think there's any chance, or I don't know. I've heard pretty doomsday stuff lately, so I think there's almost no chance they will literally go out of business. But like, how do you? It sounds like you do think they are going to still continue to go through some pretty rough times over the next couple of years, and that. Yeah, your point isn't that they're not going to shrink, or am I characterizing this wrong? It sounds like you do think they are going to become a far, far, far less dominant company, and that's why you say they're not doomed, because you've already resigned yourself to thinking that they're going to be less dominant.
Oh yeah, they're going to be less dominant. I mean, I don't think any company is going to be. I don't think Intel is ever going to be what it used to be in the 1990s. But we didn't want that. Why would we want that? Intel in the 1990s was a monopoly that stifled competition. Everyone hated on them. Like it was a terrible instance for them to be, and they got a lot of anti-monopoly lawsuits and all that. So I think it's it's going to be a changed company, but the name will still be there. I mean, so I think it won't be like a catastrophic collapse unless something really happens, and then. Wow, that'd be lawsuits. Shareholder lawsuits would be glorious. But I think it'd be it's definitely different, and I definitely think it's gonna. Well, we'll see.
Yeah, the only thing that would make me wonder if there could be this sort of out of left field collapse thing is I keep hearing they get promised money in the CHIPS Act, but. Like we're learning with some wars going on now too. Like when the U.S. promises you something, doesn't mean they gave you the check on day one. Like from what I've heard is and I think you mentioned that here just now, 5 minutes ago. Like they have a cash flow issue where the U.S. government's promised them all of these billions of dollars, but from I've heard from a couple of people, is they haven't really received a check yet, right. And they need the check. But the U.S. government doesn't want to give them a check until they prove it's going to go towards something. And that's the only thing that makes me wonder if could it actually collapse is what if they're just out of money and we don't know it, and they were counting on this one win or that one win, a few things don't win. And then it's just, they never got the money from the government yet. So, out of nowhere, there it is.
Yeah, I think the worst case, I mean, a really bad case scenario, I don't think the worst case. I mean, worst case is a meteorite hits Oregon or something. But a bad case scenario is they report that, 18A or something is delayed by 6 or 8 months, and then it keeps delaying and delaying. And because there's always things that you think are good in R&D, but that never do good in volume. And then I think there was even a couple of years ago, we had that situation where they announced that there was going to be some node that was going to be delayed. I was under the Bob Swan years, and suddenly the stock took a crap. I think that's exactly could be what happened again. I mean, you never know, right? So far, it's looking good. 18A looks good, but you never know when it hits high volume. So there's maybe
I hear good things about it too so far as well from the people I talk to. The IFS people. Intel foundries are actually the most confident people I talk to at Intel compared to all of their other groups, to be fair.
Yeah. Well, you have to. They're betting the company on it. So, that'd be the worst case scenario, or a bad case scenario where, suddenly we no longer have confidence in them. The money doesn't come in because you're right. It's just a memorandum of understanding, not real cash in the bank. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly the company needs to borrow some money from KKR or something, and Blackstone at 12% yield, and suddenly everything is in the can. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
QH Freddy writes in, he says, I feel like in the past decades, companies like Synopsis and Cadence, who've expanded from pure EDA to providing standard IP blocks for other companies using their designs, have gone somewhat underappreciated. How much do you think these companies will grow in importance now that they can move to providing ready-to-fab chiplets with standard interface for use in more complex SoCs? Would you think it's a stretch to say these companies, rather than the likes of Intel, Nvidia, or AMD, or other end product providers, will be the big winners of the chiplet era? Yeah, I mean, I'll just say openly, some of the people I talk to for some of my stuff are people at all of these other companies that Intel and Nvidia and stuff are outsourcing work to. And there are tons of them now, that people, no one talks about half of these. And I also actually add on to this that I think from what I'm hearing, Intel does it the least, and they automate their stuff the least. I've actually had people tell me that have worked at both of these companies, maybe Nvidia and Intel or something, that they would go, building things at Nvidia is so much quicker because we've automated so much of our design process, that one could almost argue that the issues Intel has had is maybe much less to do with their own people and much more to do with the fact that they're not even designing things smartly right now.
I think it makes sense to kind of say that Synopsis and Cadence are going to really grow down the line. I think they fundamentally have an amazing business, and like software, much more scalable. Software and IP so much more scalable than manufacturing. I think like these companies really are going to be big winners down the line. I think like if you're making a bet on chip complexity, right? Meaning that will chips get more complex? Will chips get more functional down the line, right? Then obviously some way has to, they need to get more complex, right? And as those designs get more complex, we need more software to wrangle that down. So I think it makes so much more sense that Synopsis and Cadence will do very well down the line. As regards to Intel, I think what stops them from buying the Cadence Synopsis packages? They should be doing. Hopefully they'll get over that soon. If
wasn't there some deal that fell through, like some tower company, I think, that Intel was trying to buy? I think I was told by some contacts that was linked to solving this problem they have.
Yeah, I heard that. I heard that to some extent, but I also heard that it was because China, China's tower. Yeah, Intel.
Well, it may have not been Intel's fault that they couldn't buy it. That it was like there's political reasons why they weren't allowed to as well.
Correct. Yeah. No, but I think QH Freddy hits it right on the head. I think Cadence and Synopsis are great companies, and I think they're going to keep growing down the line. What an oligopoly that industry is. My gosh.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think I think it was John Petty who was on the podcast at some point in the past year or two, and he goes, we don't even really know how many transistors are in our chips anymore. Like, it is actually an estimate. Like, they're not sure sometimes. Like, that's how complex some of these things are. And so it makes sense that, like, as these, like you were saying, gets more complex, maybe like the most successful companies will be the ones that are the best at not wasting money designing these things, right? Soldier 789 writes in. He says, what is the opinion of you two about Intel Gaudi against Blackwell? Is it just in time to get market share, and will it be manufactured by IFS or TSMC? So it's made on TSMC 5 nanometer. I'm going to be honest. I haven't done a whole deep dive video on Gaudi 3, so I don't know that I'm an expert on this at all. But what I will say is when I look at some of the numbers and some of the things being quoted on websites about it being 50% better than Hopper, I think one place said, and stuff, it's like, well, yeah, but that puts it around MI300X, and MI300X is already out, has a higher RAM capacity, and this will be competing probably with 350X and Blackwell. So my opinion is it's MI300X with less RAM coming out late, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on it.
It does feel like that product is one of those that came out that its schema was developed, its specs were developed before ChatGPT became a big thing and before they got to really digest the ChatGPT world. And I think MI300 as well. MI300 definitely. I mean, they were talking about it before then. So it definitely is such an interesting perspective to see how these chips are going to change down the line. And I think there is something to be said that they need to move faster on that. I think they're moving as fast as they possibly can, I hope. But they still need to move faster because Nvidia seems to be screaming down the line on this. They're moving so fast.
Yeah. I mean, and see, this is just what worries me about Intel is it's the next question I want to start transitioning into Nvidia. So I guess I'll just bring it up now. AMD launches MI300X, but it dragged their feet. It's not what they did. It's just it took longer for them to actually seemingly get it out. They had bottlenecks in manufacturing. It's complex design, but people want it. And then it's just that times two with everything Intel's trying to do. And in response, I hear about AMD trying to pull up MI450X. I hear them looking into what can they cancel and what can they pull up to keep pace with Nvidia. And you see Nvidia, like basically the gist of what I'm hearing is like, I guess part of this is opinion, part of this is something I've heard, but like Nvidia moved like they did with Maxwell last minute to a different node. I think Maxwell is going to be 20 nanometer and that just doesn't work. So they moved it back to 28 nanometer, and Blackwell was going to be 3 nanometer launching at the end of this year. And they said, no, move to 4. We're going to launch it Q3. And then we're going to make it so that Vera Rubin gets all of the 3 nanometer capacity. And actually, now Vera Rubin's going to come out, from what I've heard, and I put it in a recent video, early next year. So they're doing Rubin less than a year after Blackwell in response to AMD. In the meantime, it just seems like Intel's launching something that maybe isn't even better than AMD's last gen product late, and that's what worries me when I look at like how Intel's operate. It just still feels like they're usually a generation behind. And when Nvidia sees a competitor accelerating like AMD, they don't. Their response is, okay, well now Rubin's coming out a year earlier, so like we're going to make it happen. It makes me worry about if Intel can ever really be a competitor in AI, because no one really brings them up when I talk about them.
Yeah, I think like what they probably should, if I was in their shoes, in their corporate strategy office, I'd start tying some of these sales. Is that legal? I mean, is it legal to be saying that out loud?
Not.
But like, probably not. Yeah, I'd be tying some of these like GPU sales to the CPU sales, just bundling them like crazy, just to see what we can do. Just like Nvidia's bundling CPUs with the GPUs, right? I would say like that would be probably what I'd be doing right now, just to stuff that through. I think there's something like it's hard to keep. I feel for these people in the sense that, not in the sense that they're millionaires, but like I feel for them in the sense that like it takes 4 to 6 months to get a chip out. Like the wafers go into the oven and then they, then take 6 months to get through. So they probably saw this and they're like, well, everything you're doing right now, you have to add 6 months to it, right? Because it takes so much longer to actually make these leading edge chips now. So I think like, I think Intel, now that they no longer have that sort of positioning now that they're no longer merged with their manufacturing arm, they can't tell their manufacturing arm just to do this to catch up, right? They can't just bring a whole bunch of new chips out. They have to go into the line with AMD, Nvidia, Apple, whatever else on TSMC. And TSMC is like, well, we got all these people wanting these new chips from us. You got to wait in your line, right? So like, I feel for them. I feel for them in that way. That's the downside, I think, of being a foundry, is that like you got to prioritize. But hopefully maybe that changes with 18A. And there's going to be a whole bunch of capacity, hopefully good capacity that like Intel can use to fight, to be in this battle. We shall see. Or maybe IFS won't even give them preference. Who knows? Like that, they shouldn't.
Well, yeah, the major concern that I have with IFS is it's just, I still hear from people that they're concerned Intel will steal their stuff, basically. Like, I think they're like, yeah. I know that IFS, and you said that, TSMC is hammering that. We have literally no motive for stealing your stuff. And if we did, it would hurt our ability to get contracts from other people. Like, and that's why they keep saying that, so that you go with TSMC instead of them. But I still see it like, maybe this would be a good question for you too. Like, how much better Intel foundries would have to be than TSMC for outside people to go to them? Because I pointed this out to people before. Like, even if Intel is better than TSMC, it can't just be 10% better. 10% is nothing. Everyone's going to go, oh, you're 10% better. Well, and TSMC has a better track record of launching on time. They have no motive to steal our stuff. Intel, you got to be like 30% better for us to go with your foundry instead of theirs. And I don't know how they get out of this like chicken and egg situation with getting some big customers on their nodes. And if they don't get that, then their fabs aren't filled up. How are they affording to move to new nodes if they lose market share at the same time? Because they're not filling up that capacity with their own stuff. They're losing market share.
Yeah. I mean, that's a tough question. I mean, it's literally written in TSMC's charter that we will not compete with you. I think it's going to be very hard to compete against that. And you're right. I think 10% definitely is not enough. It needs to be a huge price cut, and it needs to be, the PDK needs to be really good, and there has to be like you know, preference and like just look at what Samsung has been trying to do. It's like Samsung Foundry against TSMC. I mean, Samsung, we all know, probably charges less than TSMC.
I've heard a lot less for some of them.
Yeah, a lot less. They have they have innovations. They seem to work really hard, and I mean, it's really tough to kind of see what like if Samsung can't do it, and Samsung's basically tying sales of of chips and foundry chips to the to like their phones and all that. Really tough for me to see IFS competing on that sort of level, which is why I said they should have split. They should split. But who knows? I mean, like I said, it's not an economic decision. It's a non-economic decision.
Yeah, I mean, just to give some, I don't know if I've said this. I've said this to a certain degree publicly and some stuff I think before, but like I'll say it now just to be clear. Like I heard from someone at Nvidia that they were getting with Ampere on 8 nanometer. They were getting the same cost per transistor that they got with 12 nanometer at TSMC. So, like, yes, it's not really a 7 nanometer competitor, but it almost is. And they were getting it the same price as TSMC, meaning that per wafer, I mean, you're getting way. I mean, they're basically getting it for less. They're spending less making these much stronger Ampere chips than they were for Turing at TSMC, and yet still. This contact at Nvidia told me I never want to go back to Samsung ever again. Like it was a complete disaster. The yield rates were never what they said they would be. I mean, they botched some of our stuff. Like I think, Switch 2 will probably use Samsung, but at that point, it's not really an issue. But I just think it's interesting to point out too, like when you say it's so hard to compete, like, yeah, Samsung had to give an almost next gen node for less than TSMC was charging with the last gen node, and even then they don't want to go back to them because it's just so easy to work with TSMC.
Right. I mean, like I think it's what did Morris Chang say? Morris Chang said basically like, TSMC has to dance with 500 partners. Intel has only danced alone, right? I think it's a very key point, and I think like Taiwanese are really good at servicing customers. They're not good at probably treating their people the best way, or as well as in the United States or Europe. They're probably not the best in work-life balance, but they're really good at taking care of their customers. I've seen it firsthand. So like, I think it's like TSMC really excels at customer service. And like the more wafers that TSMC gets from other companies and they all band together, right? And the larger you have that benefits of scale, that flywheel that you like to say at business school, where basically in the end, TSMC can get these insane yields that no one else can get because like they're pushing so many other people's wafers through. And like it's working for them. I think that's why I say it's really challenging to compete against them in that sort of aspect.
All Jessie wants is for Maurice to play with her more often. But unfortunately, he just does not give out playtime or kisses for as low of a rate as she does. And I think she's just going to have to deal with that. But do you know what you don't have to deal with? Paying too much for Microsoft software if you go to cdkeyoffer.com. This piece of content is sponsored by cdkeyoffer.com. Whether it's Microsoft operating systems, Office products, or even many of the latest games, cdkeyoffer.com provides PC gamers with a product this community deserves. Amongst endlessly elevating component costs, fair pricing on Microsoft keys is one thing that we at least should get, I think. And the Moore's Law is Dead team has been working with cdkeyoffer.com for a very long time. And that's because they're good to me, good to Dan, good to about a dozen family members of friends of mine that have used their services. And they've been really, really good, most importantly, to the Moore's Law is Dead community. So support this channel by using offer code BrokenSilicon to save 25% off Microsoft software, or you can also use Die Shrink to save 3% off everything else on the website like games. Using either of those codes really helps the channel a ton, and it helps save you money. So use those codes BrokenSilicon and Die Shrink at cdkeyoffer.com today. Well, Speaking of challenging to compete with somebody, let's talk about Nvidia for a second here. Like I said, I kind of jumped the gun, but it looks like Nvidia is pulling up Blackwell to launch early by going on 4 nanometer, putting Vera Rubin on 3 nanometer in the first half of next year. Just sounds crazy to me that they're actually going to try to do that. They're going to try to get Rubin out before AMD's even ready with MI 450X. How do you see Nvidia's position in AI? Is it all hype? Is it sustainable? In your opinion, does AMD still look like a good bet as someone who can take at least some market share against Nvidia? Because I don't think anybody thinks AMD is going to take half of the AR market from Nvidia. But do you think they could easily get to like 25, 30% or something with how aggressive Nvidia is being?
Nvidia is moving very, very fast. I think I wrote about this and put another video, and it was like, it kind of screws a lot of people over because like you suddenly, you buy something, you spend like whatever, $100 million on some chips, and then 6 months later, they're no longer the hottest thing. It's very annoying. And it sucks for a lot of people, especially for these data center people who like, they live tough lives. I mean, in terms of margin wise, they just got some, and like, but I think what Nvidia is trying to compete against is that they know that the big tech giants who are paying all this money to buy their chips are on the cusp of like building their own chips, right? Like that's the way that they're going to basically cut Nvidia's legs off, where they're going to say TPUs, they look at TPUs and like TPUs are where we want to get to. That's relationship goals right there. So like they're going to like build their own TPUs, like Microsoft's going to do it. Amazon already kind of done it, but they need to do it better. And Meta just announced their own AI chip as well. So I think it's going to be NVIDIA's perspective on that is that, well, if you're going to make your own chips, that's okay. What we're going to do is make the best chip, and they're going to be so much better than anything you can make yourself. You have to buy, and they're going to them, they're not going to care about that other stuff. They're moving so fast. It's insane. I heard it's because they don't do testing. Like they just throw the stuff out there and they just, it's very much like a kind of a money printer goes burr kind of thing. They're going to make mistakes, but I think it's a reflection of what I said this before. It's like with the graphics card, back in the graphics cards wars, they basically, they beat everyone else by just iterating 2 times a year, and it was a crazy time, and I think they're going back to that again.
So you think, like pulling up Rubin, I mean, I'm sure AMD is part of the equation, but do you think it has less to do with AMD than like doing a generation every year to less than every year for a few years straight? It's more about just making sure none of these other customers want to stop buying their stuff over the stuff they're making in-house. That's more so like that.
I agree with that. Like, and AMD, of course, is a competitor. I think AMD can do more, and AMD definitely has a great product. And I think NVIDIA thinks about that. They probably worry more about AMD than they worry more about these random AI accelerator startups they're popping up everywhere, right? So I think they're worried more about that. So obviously what they're going to do is they're going to iterate to compete against those. I think MI 300 is a great chip. So like, let's not, they're not going to kind of downplay it or look at it lightly, take it lightly.
The Immortal Cameraman writes in, and he says, AMD is challenging NVIDIA, though. When you look at product launches between both companies over the years, you'll notice a particular trend. NVIDIA tries to punch down AMD's momentum when they get any, or throw cold water at it whenever AMD directly challenges them in any way. We saw this with the admittedly overhyped Vega series from AMD versus the 1080 Ti that they launched preemptively before Vega was ever out, and at a higher level of performance at a lower price than anyone expected, just to kill the momentum. You also saw this with 20 Super, 3080 Ti, 3060 Ti, and even the recent 40 Super launches. We know NVIDIA won't sit still, but I have to ask, did Radeon Instinct finally reach a level of performance or price performance that put some kind of pressure on NVIDIA, and that's why Rubin is all of a sudden launching way sooner than expected after Blackwell? We know NVIDIA doesn't make these kind of moves and AMD's far behind. Yeah, so I suppose we've mostly answered this question though already. Like pretty much, like I basically found a way to ask his question before I needed to ask it. But I don't know if there's anything there where you think there's something to Nvidia where they do what they have to do. They tend to charge more than people expect, but then once in a blue moon, they see a competitor and they're just way more generous than people expected just to crush it right there. Do you think that there's kind of a trend with them doing that? And do you think that is maybe a bit of what's going on here?
Yeah, I do think so. I do think there's a lot of dynamics in play. Like, you don't bet billions of dollars just because of one reason, right? Nvidia's not sitting still, not just because AMD. AMD's probably, if I was smart, if I was over there, I'd be churning the midnight oil just to get the next AMD chips out too, right? I think what Nvidia is probably thinking is like, hey, look, everyone's working really hard to take our bagel. Like, what we're going to do is we're going to work really hard now too. And like, who cares what everyone else is thinking? Let's get the best chip out as soon as we possibly can. It's kind of funny, do you know AMD almost bought Nvidia a couple years ago?
Yeah, I saw that in one of your videos recently. And I had heard about that before, but you reminded me, and you also reminded me why the deal didn't go through in your video, which was that Jensen said, sure, you can buy me, but now I am the CEO of AMD.
That's right. Would have been a reverse takeover kind of thing. And I think, I was reading the guy, Hector Ruiz, who he was talking about it. And he was basically saying, I'm not interested in that. But imagine what would have happened if Hector Ruiz, because he left 1 or 2 years after that anyways. So he was already on the way out. So it's so interesting to think if Jensen took over an AMD, Nvidia sort of.
I mean, there's certainly a non-zero chance they would have just become such a dominant company that it's absurd. I mean, imagine, and I've always heard from people who have met Jensen and had spent any amount of time with him that something people don't realize, he always brings up CPUs. He always brings up, you'd think he'd always be talking about GPUs. And maybe it's just because it's something to talk about that is related to work but not work. But he wants to have a dominant gaming CPU, just so he wants to win that too. And you have to imagine if he would have reverse taken over AMD, he would have been, I'm just telling you, I'm sure he would have had a direct hand in looking over. Who knows if he would have done any better of a job, but looking over what happened with Bulldozer and stuff. I think he would have maybe lost some focus on GPU, but maybe we would have got a way stronger CPU competitor out of AMD much sooner. I don't know. I honestly wonder how ATI would have survived, actually, is my biggest thought on that.
They would have gone down, I think, or they would have sold to Intel or something. But I think that would have been really fascinating to think about with Jensen running CPUs like that. I think he would have, who knows what he could have done. You're right. Who knows what he could have done, but it would have been an interesting history. Do you think,
go on.
Random, I don't want to throw in a question in between. But
please.
Do you think Nvidia doesn't consider keyman risk enough with Jensen?
Well, did you see, I covered it on Broken Silicon. There's a significant, I don't remember the number, so if sounds like I'm inflating it too much, people forgive me, but they announced in their earnings a significant expenditure on his security.
Yeah.
I forgot what it was. I wonder if I could Google it. Nvidia earnings, security, protect, CEO. I wonder if I can't find it quick enough here, but it made the news when people were looking through their earnings. I don't know. I want to say it was half a year ago. One of them was they just hired a massive amount of security personnel to be around Jensen at all times.
That's crazy.
So to answer your question, I don't know if it's enough, but they've thought about that.
It's so weird because it's in Taiwan, he comes to Taiwan sometimes, and it didn't even make the news. He used to just go to this night market and just buy stuff. Now he goes to the night market. And when I always saw these pictures, he would always be alone. It's literally just Jensen Huang in his leather jacket. Maybe not his leather jacket. Summers here are brutal.
Yeah, but often a leather jacket, though.
Yeah, but he's going through the night market buying random traditional medicine things. And it's it's so weird because it's no security. But now, I wonder next time he's there, is he going to do that again? Because there's so much more publicity now. People would definitely
just
sort of
30. No, the picture will look very fun, and what you won't see is just off camera. There's 30 armed guards and a helicopter overhead, making sure the entire area is locked down, the president's there or something.
Yeah, Yeah, be fun. But that guy basically runs Nvidia. It's crazy to think about it. Like, think about Keyman Risk. I mean, he's 62, right? I mean, I've always been interested in what would successor to Nvidia, Jensen's successor would look like at Nvidia, because he's got like what 40 direct reports or something. It's crazy.
Well, and that was a reader mail I got for Broken Silicon. I don't remember which episode. I don't know. Yeah, months ago too. And someone asked which company would suffer the most, AMD, Nvidia, or Intel, if their CEO just overnight vanished. And I said I could see here an argument for why AMD or Intel. Like, I think the argument I made is, depending on how you think about Intel, like, is Intel's current problems, would they be 10 times worse if Pat Gelsinger wasn't there? Because they all seem to like him and believe in him. And I tend to like him too. But, you know, we don't know. That we can't prove a negative. Can't simulate another situation where Pat Gelsinger's it. So I don't know if the current issues Intel has would be even worse if Pat wasn't there. But I would suggest that if like Lisa Su went away, I feel like they would know what to do. Like, they're already kind of with enough momentum. There's a few people I can think of that might take over. So I was like, I think AMD probably be the least hurt, although it would be a huge blow morally. And then I was like, but for sure Nvidia would suffer the most. Like, and then after I said that, one of my contacts at Nvidia messaged me and went, oh yeah, we would be hurt the most. Like, I'm just letting you know, like, without him, it would be a rudderless ship. I honestly don't even know what we would do, this person said.
Yeah, it's very. I'd be worried. That no wonder they beefed up the security so much.
Yeah. All right, let me skip ahead here. Let me skip to this one. Huge Freddy writes in and he says, do you think it is correct to say Nvidia is not really using chiplets for their B100 as opposed to AMD, who has a more legit chiplet design with RDNA 3 and MI300? So it was interesting too. I saw some people when Blackwell was announced, the AI version of it, not the gaming, that uses 2 chiplets. It's like, he even says on stage, no part of this chip knows which part of the chip it's on. It's not even programmed to be seen as. I'm like, did they really use chiplets? They kind of seem like they're just monolithic still. Like, what they did is they just welded these 2 chips together with pure cache to make it work, just like Apple has done with their. I thought it was like 20 trillion connections between them, or something. It was something ridiculous. I don't know. It was probably a billion. Maybe it was trillion between the 2 chips so that they act as monolithic with like the M Ultra with Apple. Would you agree that anyone saying like B100 is a chiplet design, it's not really a chiplet design?
Yeah, I wouldn't say. I mean, it's very interesting to look at like how they're developed, how there's overlap between these 2 technologies, right? Like, that's the first thing I looked at when I saw that the B100 is kind of 2. Looks like it's 2 chips put together. I was like, that looks exactly like that one Apple chip. And probably goes to this, probably stems from the fact it's built on TSMC platform, right? So I think maybe going forward, what you're going to see is a lot of the overlap between one company to another. And so I think, like, if you look at what, I think it's very indicative. I think the reason why they haven't gone chiplet, I think you've talked about this before, of course, it's like it's complex.
So the way you phrase that, you don't really think of it as a chiplet. You said the reason they haven't gone. So you don't really see it that way, Joe, just to be clear.
Yeah, I don't see it as like, sorry if I misspoke.
You didn't misspeak. I just want to make it clear, you know.
Got it. Yeah, I don't think as like, I think one of the reasons, you could argue that one of the reasons why AMD is taking so long to get these new designs out is because they're doing it chiplet style, right? When you are doing it all in a single piece of silicon, maybe even like a merged double piece of silicon, like there's a lot more complexity, but at least it's all there, right? It's all moving at the same time. It's like you're offloading a lot of complexity to the fab. The fab is basically going to be like, we're going to put this all in one piece of silicon, make it all at once. And I get the sense that it's much faster to get those types of chips out than a chiplet type fab, because you're pulling from so many different suppliers, so many more connections, worry about delays and all. And it's it must be a bit of a pain to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, I was speaking to someone at Nvidia somewhat recently about this, and like, the way it was put, or the way I would put my interpretation of what they said is, if you don't think that Nvidia is looking into chiplets constantly, they are. And who's to say if they're wrong? AMD certainly thinks they're right to use them. But NVIDIA is doing cost benefit analysis, and they just keep coming to the conclusion every generation, not now. Not now. Cheaper to do it the other way, quicker to do. And I think the quicker thing, especially when it comes to AI, was actually that was something that was distinctly mentioned by a couple of people. It's like, it's going to cost us more. It may set us back a generation in chiplet tech. But what we know is, and this was before I knew Rubin was coming out less than a year after Blackwell. Now this all makes even more sense. They were like, the issues they ran into with RDNA 3 that made it come out after Lovelace instead of before Lovelace, and with a performance penalty they weren't expecting. What we know is, even if our chip costs twice as much to make, it will come out first. It will be as high performance as we project it to be. And we will already be moving on to the next problem that will come out first with even more. So at least for now, this runaway effect is what we're going to bet on over trying to get ahead of chiplet technology, so that once we master it, we have an outsized advantage. They're like, we think the speed advantage is worth more than the long-term understanding new technology advantage. Is basically the argument that was made.
Makes a lot of sense to me. And I think it's, does throw some water on the chiplet revolution, if you would like to call it. I think, like, from the very beginning, people expected chiplets to be a cost-saving measure, right? It's a cost-saving measure in light of developments in semiconductor technology. But when
per unit it is, usually.
Yeah. I agree with you, yeah. But in the sense that, like, Nvidia is selling a chip for like 60,000, 50,000. They're buying a wafer from TSMC for like 10 grand and 15 grand and selling it for 60 grand, right? They don't really care about the cost. They just need to get this stuff out before, Google makes a better TPU.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it's worth, I did a video on this too, like talking about, like, I try to make an example of like why the way Intel is doing tiles is kind of like the dumbest way to do chiplets, is the argument I made. Like, an example I made was Sapphire Rapids. Just that generation. Or I don't remember if I used Raptor. I probably used Raptor Lake. It was like Raptor Lake and Sapphire Rapids. So it's like, Intel has a 2+8 die for Raptor Lake. So I'm going to start tallying here on my piece of paper. They've got a 6+8. They've got an 8+16. So that's just desktop. And then they've got actually 2 versions of a chiplet for Sapphire Rapids, because they put 4 together, But, right, so they had to mirror it. They actually designed 2 chips to make Sapphire Rapids. I've said this before, that, like, I feel like in many ways, Intel, at least so far, has done tiles in kind of the dumbest way, like missing half the benefits, like compared to AMD. Like, I did a video, I don't remember which one it was, but like where I actually compared, like, AMD is like proving how you do chiplets in a way that doesn't just cost more. Like, the way they do it, an example I gave was, I looked at like the Sapphire Rapids era, which I guess we're still basically in with Intel, but and I said, right, so if I tally this here, we have 2+8 cores for a Raptor Lake mobile. So that's 1 chiplet. 6+8 for the bigger Raptor Lake mobile. There's another one. And then I believe there's like a PCH die for both of those that they use with the mobile chips. And then they also have the 8+16 desktop die they sometimes use. Right, now let's move to server. We have Sapphire Rapids, which I bet you've seen. It's like 4 chiplets, but it's really 2 different ones. It's not like they take 1 chiplet. If you think of Zen 1 Naples, that was 1 8-core, that was 1 chiplet put together times 4. They only had to design it once. And that saves so much money. Sapphire Rapids is actually still 2, because they had to mirror it so that they could fit together as 4. So that's 2 there. All right, so that's 6 chiplets to make basically 2 product lines. All right, with AMD, IO die for Epic, IO die for desktop, chiplet, done, 3. And they can make actually, and then I guess 1 more for Zen 4C. And they could make 3 different types of products, whereas Intel could only make 2 different types of products with 50% more types of chiplets they had to design. You look at what Nvidia is doing. They decided 1 chiplet. It's welded together. It's not really chiplets, but also they're not incurring basically any of the costs AMD does. And AMD is minimizing the amount of costs they have. So I don't know. I mean, like, and these are also, with AMD 70mm squared chiplets. So like, there's a lot of cost benefit to like the incredible yields you'll get with a small die. But it does make you start wondering like what they're going to do with AI moving forward, because I do think it will continue to pay dividends for these CPU and EPYC sharing products, and maybe an APU soon. Although, like, as I think Strick's point is monolithic, but I heard that they tried chiplets and it didn't work, or they had some issues with it. But you got to wonder if in AI they can't do it this way anymore. Like, if they're going to have to start looking more Nvidia like AMD is with some of their products. And I guess letting the cat out of the bag a little bit here, but something that I've heard about upcoming AMD MI products, some of them may use less chiplets than before. And you have to wonder if they're looking at that and going, hey, what we're doing makes sense. We designed a few chiplets, but if it requires us to design more chiplets than we would have done anyways, again, right, Intel has to design like 4-6 chiplets just to make basic products. So as long as you're designing less than 6, you're not spending more design money. But when you look at MI300X, I don't know. They designed a bunch of chiplets for one product, and I wonder if they're thinking to themselves, this isn't sharing a lot of these chiplets. We're going to keep falling behind just because there will be unknown unknowns in testing, They keep popping to do that.
That makes a lot of sense to like that AMD would take more of like the Nvidia-like approach down the line. If if they feel like they need to, if that first MI300 chip took so long and CoWoS is in shortage, I don't know how much longer, probably not very long, but like if they need to work around that, just make the wafer, just put it monolithic and like rely on,
or use less chiplets, bigger ones. Maybe there's chiplets, but they're not as tiny.
Right. It makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that I would not be surprised to see them do that down the line, especially considering that the AI boom, we have no idea how long it's going to last, and we have no idea how it's going to develop. And these chips are basically algorithms frozen into sand, right? Or silicon. So as as algorithms and new software and new architectures pop up, I think it's very necessary for the chip companies to be as agile as they possibly can. And anything that cuts down on that makes it longer for them to develop a chip, they should throw that to the wayside. Because right now, if you're looking for performance, the software side of this is moving so fast that like you can't waste your time optimizing and over optimizing as unnecessary.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, because I'm sure there is a right balance. I mean, AMD's been doing fine, very well. Fine, they've been doing great, So I imagine that they're probably thinking to themselves, what we've been doing with EPYC and Ryzen, that's working, but it is not working in AI as well as it could be. It's working better than Intel probably, but it's not working as well as it could be. And moving forward, now that we have this money, now that we can demand a premium, people see our brand well, maybe we should be using chiplets less often on some things. Again, I heard Strix started as a chiplet APU, and they axed that just to make sure it came out in this year, even if it's delayed, and had less unknowns pop up. It'll be interesting, because I'm sure there is a balance. I don't think the answer is all or nothing. And you think if they get the balance right, that would still be a weapon they could wield against Nvidia. If Nvidia hasn't mastered the use of a bunch of small chiplets as much as AMD has yet.
Yeah. And I mean, AMD is also facing the tech giant chip problem too. I mean, like they also have to realize that their product has to be competitive and far better than the whatever else that those companies can make by themselves. And if chiplets is part of that solution, and they're really good at chiplets and it can help them deliver that extra performance, yeah, I agree. They shouldn't ditch it.
All right. Well, that's all I had for the main subjects to discuss, but I have one more question here that I thought would be fun to ask. Wombat writes in and he says, I will be visiting Computex for the first time. What are some tips for my first visit to Taipei, and what do I have to see there outside of Computex, in your opinion?
Oh my gosh. Where should I begin? I think everyone needs to go try the food. I think the night markets are really good. City night market is just okay. That's the one where all the tourists go. But there's some my personal favorite is Raohe, which is down at Songshan area. So that's really good. You should try that out. There's these pork buns, these pepper pork buns. This is really fun. Get the soup dumplings, Din Tai Fung, of course. Like, there's my favorite location is the one down at Dongmen, near Dongmen MRT. You got to go do that. Everyone talks about the National Palace Museum, and I do think that's a really great museum. It's very, you get to see the cabbage. Sometimes they move stuff down to the Southern Palace Museum now, which is kind of annoying because it's kind of middle of nowhere. But still fun to go to. Damsui area is nice because that's near the ocean. It's going to be June, so it's going to be brutal. Definitely hate it. So you hit the beach. It's really nice. I like the cultural parks. Hwasan 1814 Cultural Park is really good for just walking around because you get to see kind of just random exhibitions from week to week. Taipei is not really a silicon. Like, if you're really obsessed with silicon, Taipei is not really the place you go because Taipei. Well, a lot of people when they come visit me, they come say hi. They say, "Oh, I didn't expect there to be so little like semiconductors here," and I'm just like, "Yeah, I mean, Taipei is kind of where the old money is, like the old money and like the insurance business, the banking business, and all that. If you want to go see fabs, you go to Hsinchu probably, and." Then I would recommend, and you can probably make it, but like if you book a appointment at the TSMC Museum of Innovation down at Hsinchu, that would be an amazing get because I went. They built this museum. It's kind of a Taiwanese thing. Every company has to have a museum as a quote unquote museum, and I went to a pineapple museum once, and it was weird, but like. There is the TSMC Museum of Innovation is really nice. They built it. They put some chips in it. The first 20 minutes is like it was clearly built for school children. So of course. The first 20 minutes is like they're walking you down. And I went there during the chip shortage, during when Taiwan was locked down, so it was easy to get in. But like this was when TSMC was becoming more well known. And I was walking through this museum, and they were like. I'm not sure if you really need to know this, but like, chips are important for your dishwasher and chips are important for your refrigerator and they go in your car sometimes too. But then like after the 20 minutes tour, you get to like, if you go into some of the videos of some of the other, like there's a handwritten letter by Morris Tang about like how the charter, about the 10 principles TSMC should adhere to. There's videos by like really deep videos about what the deposition techniques and gate all around and high K, all this crazy stuff, semiconductor engineering, and they just hide that in there. And I mean, this is definitely it's very intense. You will have a great time, and of course, it's basically the only reference for like half of the videos of what TSMC's fabs look like. You can't go into the fabs, but you can watch these videos about like what the fabs inside look like in their various locations. Can't miss it. So Museum of Innovation, big thing for any silicon fan.
All right. Well, thank you for the recommendations. And I mean, I think that's a good place to end it then. Thank you, John, so much for coming on again. I imagine we'll talk again as well, but this has been another really, really, really fun talk. Please plug your wares, like tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, that was a pleasure to be on. You can find me on Asianometry, ASIAN. Be linked down below. But like,
it's spelled how you would think it would be.
Yeah. So like, it's a pleasure, and just keep watching the channel, and we'll stay in touch. Thank you.
All right. And of course, thank you to everybody who did watch and listen to this. Make sure you hit the like button, comment below for the algorithm, tell your friends about this, share this as much as you can. Sharing helps a lot. And subscribe to the Moore's Laws Ed YouTube channel and on a podcast app of your choice to Broken Silicon, and give us a review there as well. We have a Patreon as well, where you get bonus content, can ask us questions, access to a Discord as well. We can't do this without our patrons, especially like YouTube ad revenue is just terrible this year, actually. So just know that if there was ever a year to join the Patreon, that was a year to join Patreons. I do know what's going on. they're taking our money. But like Google's ad revenue is not good right now. So, please
it's terrible.
support
I can't even.
both of us there if you can.
Yeah. I can't even. I don't know what's going on over there. It's
I know, because like I'll be like getting more views than ever before, and it's like, how is the ad revenue lower? This doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make sense to me too. It's ridiculous. I'm so annoyed. Sorry, but yes, thank you.
All right. Support us on Patreon. And of course, again, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Have a good week, everybody. This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carmen Cry and Carrie Nosugad as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the About/Support page. In the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Carrie Nosugada as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong. We love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guest questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit, and give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels: Brad Medlin, Drita Foles, Z Chits, Daniel D, Aaron Close, Jan Rauner, Daniel Hyde, GZ Ziggy, Deke, Nicholas Buckner, MJB1, Senias Chalmers, Jem Ferrier, Valcom Olev, HardForum.com, Jensen Wang, Gregory S. Acker, Sarcastro, Evan Dingle, Andrew S., Chris Rich, Compressed Earthflux, 3DS Boy 08, Hal Buma, Shredbird, Greg Wanchek, Holden Mobley, Benjamin Cannon, Jonathan, Sammy Malas, Blake, Franco Frederic, Jordan Simkovic, Toka, Julian Leak, Jake 223, The Boss Haas, Jake Martin, Zlicky, Stephen Hart, Meat and Pork, Tim Robb, Ian Clifford, Travis Gooding, Stefan, Chrysantine, Mads, Utsu Taylor, Stephen Coates, Michael McGee, Greg, Patty Cakes, Amiable Chief, Tommy, Mark Mitchell, Nithra Zink, Should, Mark Raidmaker, James Anderson, Cole Addict, Judson N, Cameron, Wesley Sager, Henry Zhang, Michelle Pell, D31337 Antics, Hexa Puma, Reginald Ari, Teak Autumn, Gaiman Since Reagan, Jeff Sedler, Loophole 35, Jamie Witters, JSMMH, Windstar, James I, Raider, Corey Leonard, Little Germany, Shay, Milton, Pulse Media, Melodic Warrior, Dave Schultz, McDaffie, Stephen Dick, Chuck Glidden, Brett Jones, Austin Haggerty, Justin Bustle, I-7011700K, Jofit, Mai Sharona, Earth Taurus, Hardland, Slushbot, Jensen Angima, Joseph Kelly, Samuel Park, Winwang, Himsagung, Tails 2299, Mio Valverga, John Sisyphos 7771, Charles Russell, The Forbidden Juice, RV Racer, AC Bright Right, Michael Cozy, Dr. J Mab, Alex Vega, Freedy, John Swin, Joel Martina, Geekum, Elbergun, Solarize 80, Matthew Marlowe, Whodat42, Penta Winter, Rowan McKickey, Cornstir 671, Sprutnik, Jeffrey Gentleman, Angel of Cake, Omega Doge, Roger Webster, Ian Polcastro, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.